Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are at the All-Star break in this 2033 season, and I think we're doing a pretty decent job saving the A's this year. We've got a 57-42 record. That does put us 9 games behind the Texas Rangers, who are having a borderline historic season. But we are in the first wild card spot in the American League, 3.5 games above the White Sox for the final wild card spot, and 8.5 games above our division rival Astros for missing out on the playoffs. So we are pretty well positioned at this point. In what's becoming a common theme with these Oakland A's, though, as good as we're doing on the field this year, particularly within the context of the fact that we once again have the lowest budget and lowest payroll in all of baseball, we're still likely headed towards a season where there's going to be a lot of turnover, and we're going to be losing potentially losing three very significant players this offseason. Our top 2 starters, Jackson Ferris, who's been with us since the 2029 season at this point, is going to be headed to free agency. He's looking for $23 million a year over 6 years. Chase Burns, another one of our top starters, is very similarly looking for $23.2 million a year, but only over 5 years. And then last but certainly not least, Kyle Manzardo, who we picked up this year as a rental, is also headed to free agency. And he's looking for $22 million over 5 years. Now, given where we are this year, with a payroll of a little over $100 million, and the fact that we're projected to be at about $83 million next year, and we can likely make some decisions and moves that will lower that number a bit, it's conceivable that we could bring back one of that group, Ferris, Burns, or Manzardo, when all is said and done, and once we get to the off season and see who the potential free agents are and make sure that everybody among those 3 is healthy. It's conceivable that maybe we bring one of them back, but regardless, there's going to be a lot more turnover, particularly at the top end of the roster with this team this upcoming off season, which always puts us in the situation where when we're competitive, I want to try to be a win now team. And we are certainly competitive this year. We're ranked 4th in the latest power rankings. We've won 5 games in a row heading into the All-Star break. And if the season were over today, we would be in a wild card series and hosting a wild card series. And again, given that we're 9 behind the Rangers in the division, potentially hosting a wild card series is probably about the best outcome we can expect for the beginning of the postseason this year. And we're going to be talking through a potential trade shortly that hopefully will address the issues we talked about in terms of being a win-now team, but also expecting to lose some important players for the future. But in the meantime, since the last episode, we've already made another trade, and we have reunited with our former catcher, Drake Baldwin. We let him leave this past off season as a free agent. Actually, we traded him away. He was going into an option year for $5.5 million. And we thought that turning the position over to the youngster who came up through our system, Jaden Boakai, would be a more cost-effective route for us given our financial limitations. But Cleveland, just having Mr. Baldwin for this 1 year and being a team that's not really competitive, they put him on the trade market, and they were willing to keep all of his contract, which was positive for us. We gave up our backup catcher, Adonis Guzman, who's actually hit really well for us with a 300 average this year. Captain, great personality, excellent defensively, but looking at his profile, there's no way that we expect him to continue hitting 300. And honestly, looking at his batting splits, he had an incredible April with a 500 average. And since then, he's hit 235, 190, and 231 in each of the last 3 months. So he has steadily been coming down to earth, and I think what bringing the left-handed hitting Baldwin on board will allow us to do is put Baldwin in the lineup more regularly against right-handed pitching for us, which is historically what we've most often done with him, and let us move the young right-handed hitting Boakai into a position where he's only starting against left-handed pitching, and then giving Baldwin a rest when he needs one, which hopefully will let Boakai hit a little better as a right-handed hitter, being able to specialize a little bit against left-handed pitching. We also to give up 2 very middling prospects. 22-year-old pitcher Jose Treviso, certainly don't view him as a big-time prospect. The left fielder Prince Moultrie, perhaps a little bit more of a legitimate prospect. Really good personality and looks like he could be a pretty good contact hitter. He was hitting 276 with a 134 WRC plus for us in high A ball, but at almost 24 years old was not really a big part of our future. And the hope is that Baldwin helps us generate a little more offense out of the catcher position while still being a very good defensive catcher, although his arm is not quite what it used to be. And it never was that good to begin with. And as we think about what else we might want to do here in the trade market, we talked about at the end of the last episode that our pitching, which ranks second in the American League in runs allowed and is in the top half of the league and well into the top half of the league in every category, is certainly not an issue. Defense is also real good. And the batting is certainly fine this year, but ranking 6th in the American League in runs scored, that's an area that we've historically struggled at with this team, this franchise, and think that maybe adding a bat who can help us this year and possibly into the future may be the way to go. Kevin Stubblefield, we still have high expectations for him, but he's hitting just 201 this year with a 70 WRC plus, and he's not doing much at all against right-handed pitching. So perhaps finding someone who he can get into the lineup over Stubblefield would help. Doesn't necessarily mean that we would send Stubblefield right back down to the minors, although it's possible. But Cody Morton, another right-hander who we picked up in a trade about a month ago, hasn't gotten a real good opportunity with us, but he is hitting only a $180 with no homers in the 50 at-bats that he has had for us. And as we talked about when we picked him up, he's in his last option year, so he's somebody who we could conceivably move down to AAA as well if we look to add another bat. Upgrading at shortstop offensively is something that we're certainly considering, particularly with Marcelo Meyer out there. But despite the fact that Maui Ahuna is only hitting 208, he still has a 1.3 WAR on the season for us. His defense has been very good, and at a position like shortstop, that's probably the one of 2 positions on the field, along with catcher, where I'm probably most willing to deal with a lack of offense if the player is very good to excellent defensively. And Ahuna this year, as a defensive shortstop, has a 6.1 zone rating and a 1.059 defensive efficiency, so he has certainly been a well above average defensive shortstop for us. The price for Marcelo Meyer, as we think about the trade block, is also one of the highest prices out there in terms of what we'd have to give up to bring him on board. Doesn't mean that we won't do it. But the other thing we have to consider with Meyer is he's making $37 million next year. Now, the Red Sox have kept 50% of that, but we'd still be on the hook for $18.5 million of Meyer's salary next year if we weren't able to get the Rays to keep a chunk of it, which we would certainly intend to do. The other thing that's a little bit of a concern for me about Marcelo Meyer is that he's on the wrong side of 30 now, and over the last season and a half, he's been a below average offensive player. Now, a 91 WRC plus is still a big upgrade from what Mr. Ahuna has done for us offensively. But when you factor in the defense and the whole package, Meyer's 0.9 WAR this year is actually lower than what we've received from Ahuna. So I have pivoted a little bit, at least right now, and things may very well change again over the next week, week and a half as we get closer to the end of the trade deadline, where I'm looking for more of a bat. And it's a name that I've mentioned before. It's a name we've had on our team before, and it's a name that in the comments to the last episode, Paul West brought up a potential reunion with Brian Ramos, and I think it's something that could work out well for us. Ramos, you may remember, was with us a year ago. We picked him up as a rental, and he only had 50 at-bats with us, but he was pretty productive in those 50 at-bats before he suffered a season-ending injury, putting up a 124 WRC plus for us. Wasn't a guy we could afford, or more accurately, was a guy who we decided not to afford and to go in a different direction, most notably spending our potential free agent money on Colt Keith rather than Brian Ramos this past offseason. But he's continued to produce at a very similar level for Houston. He signed a 2-year deal with them at 10.4 this year, 10.9 million next year. And we've got the opportunity to bring him on board. He's also a popular player. Maybe we'll get a little boost in fan interest and attendance from that. And a very good bat against left-handed pitching, and a competent bat against right-handed pitching that, given Mr. Ramos' long track record as a very productive offensive player, and a guy who's been basically as productive against right-handed pitching than he has been against left-handed pitching, feel confident that if we do decide to move a Stubblefield out of the starting lineup against right-handed pitching, that Ramos could certainly do more than he has. The other thing I like about Ramos, if we're able to get the Astros to keep a good chunk of his contract, is that he is signed for next year. So he, in a way, becomes a bit of a natural replacement for us for the likely loss of Kyle Manzardo. I think Manzardo is a better offensive player at this point, and Manzardo is a left-handed hitter than a right-handed hitter, so they're not perfect replacements for one another. But Ramos would give us a right-handed bat who could certainly fit in the middle of our lineup going forward. And when we think about who will be back with us next year, Luis Lara, Jake Ortega, Colt Keith, Bobby Cabral, Kevin Stubblefield, Sergio Estrada probably all will be. We'll be likely losing some guys at the bottom of the order in the likes of Ahuna and Baldwin and Manzardo in the middle of the order. But I do think that potentially bringing on board Ramos for the balance of this season and next year could help us replace Manzardo, and then maybe that pivots us to a position where before we get to the off season, bringing back a Ferris or a Burns ends up making sense for us. Although the injury that Ramos had for us very shortly after we picked him up last year was extremely disappointing for a playoff team that had hopes of making a long run. He is still normal as far as his injury proneness, so I think he's a guy that could fit well into our lineup, help us win this year, And as I said, if we're able to get the Astros to keep a decent chunk of his contract, which I intend to do, he'd be a pretty cost-effective veteran bat for us next year as well. So I've got a proposed trade that I've put together offline since our last episode that I'm going to talk through. We're giving up a lot for a 31-year-old who's nothing special defensively. But we're also in a situation where this deal is going to give us a hitter for a year and a half, close to a season and a half, and also have the Astros retain a chunk of it. So the price is not cheap. We're giving up a relatively recent first-round draft pick as well as a few other players to bring Ramos on board in the deal that I'm contemplating. But I still think it makes sense, or it likely makes sense, and we'll start talking through it now. So trying to trade for Ramos straight up, basically the only way to do that is to give one of the top prospects in our system or a very important major league player to pick him up. And that is not the plan that works for me. I certainly don't want to give up Uresti, who's one of the top prospects in our organization. I'd consider giving up Shiloh Solis, who we picked in the first round a couple years back, but would prefer to keep him around. And then everyone else who can get this deal done is a pretty important member of the major league roster. And given that we are trying to win now this year, the addition by subtraction math doesn't work that well in my mind, which is why we're going to try to put together a package centered around a prospect that we don't like as much as Solis or Uresti, but still a player who's got pretty good potential and that we've spent a lot of resources to bring on board. And that player is Sergio Figueroa. He was our first-round draft pick, number 32 overall in 2030, the year after we won the World Series. Recently promoted him to A-ball, where he certainly has not been tearing things up. Do think that his ability to draw walks and hit home runs are potentially still very interesting. But he's over 21 years old now. He just made it to A-ball, and outside of his eye, he's still far off from major league quality in most of the key batting traits. His speed and his defense were never going to be anything special. I like his personality. If he fully develops, it's a lot to be given up for a year and a half of Brian Ramos, and Figueroa alone doesn't make this work now. It just opens it up to a few other options to get the deal done. But I don't think at 21 and a half years old that Figueroa is going to reach his full potential. And if that power in particular doesn't develop, he's an average offensive outfielder with average speed, who's kind of a average-ish hitter who just happens to draw a few walks. So I certainly don't love including Figueroa in the deal, but the fact that we will have Ramos for a season and a half, and that I don't necessarily think Figueroa is going to be what we hoped he could be when we drafted him a few years back, makes me willing to consider him as part of this deal, and quite honestly is the key part of this deal. And the second guy that I have to add into the deal, and this guy along with Figueroa gets us basically at the point where we've got a deal that we can work with, is the veteran at this point infielder Hideki Arakawa. He's spent most of this year in AAA for us, where he's done a fine job with a 104 WRC+. We like his glove. We like some of his personality traits. We like that he's a left-handed hitting middle infielder, a little bit different, but We have to be honest about what Arakawa is, and he's almost 32 years old, and he's got a 73 WRC plus over parts of 5 seasons in the majors with us. And importantly, even though he's in AAA for us this year, he's making 1.75 million, and his arbitration number next year is going to be 2.8 million as a 32-year-old. So Arakawa is a great insurance policy for our infield, a versatile, good, solid glove, but not a guy that I expect would be back with our organization next year anyways. So we're willing to include him as well. And the final guy that we'll add in just to get the deal done is the veteran pitcher Wilmer Flores, who's in the minor leagues for us. He is not a big part of our future either. So now the question is just how many additional players do we need to add to potentially get them to keep a little bit more of this contract. And even with Flores, you can see that they're willing to keep 40% of Ramos' contract. We'd like that number to get to be a little bit higher, so we're going to add in another guy or two. But Figueroa, the prospect, and Arakawa, the solid defensive infielder, are the two key pieces that we're going to give up for this season plus rental of Brian Ramos. And if we add in another 4A pitcher in the starter, Joseph Zirwa, 29-year-old, who's also in our minor league system, that gets them to retain 65% of the contract. We're actually going to add in one additional player essentially for free. This one is a major league guy. We're going to cut ties with Alex Vesia. And adding him in does not get them to keep any more of Ramos' contract. But Vesia is a guy who is on the 40-man roster, and we still owe him a portion of the $1.4 million he's owed this year. He's been the worst pitcher out of our bullpen with a 7.71 ERA through the 18 games that he's pitched, a sickly 1.71 WHIP, a sickly 55 ERA plus, and a below average 108 FIP minus. Some of you have noted in the past that the BABIP he's given up this year at 368 will probably revert towards a lower number, and that his Sierra is almost 4 runs better than his ERA. But he's 37 years old, and I'd rather just save the money that we owe him, given that I think we do have good replacements for him in AAA. So to me, this is an example of addition by subtraction, where we'll save a little money by including Vesia in the deal. With those extreme fly ball tendencies, the below average movement on his pitches, I do have a lot of fear that Vesia at some point may give up a really big hit for us as we're trying to make the playoffs or in the playoffs. And as I talked about, he has been by far the least productive pitcher out of our bullpen all year. Everyone else in the bullpen has an ERA of 3.79 or lower on the season. So Vesia basically 4 runs worse than anybody else on the team. And at his age, certainly not part of our future. And as I said, I think we've got better options than Vesia in AAA to replace him on the roster. So Figueroa is obviously the key guy in the deal. Arakawa and Vesia also useful. And honestly, Flores and Zirwa useful for organization and possibly even at the major league level for a team that is lacking some pitching. Given that the Astros, as we talked about, are also the team that, while they're well out of a wild card berth at this point and they're below 500 on the year, weakening the Astros also, or I think weakening the Astros again, certainly weakening them this year is even the 4 guys who might be on their roster this year I don't think are as good as Ramos. Now we may be helping a division rival for the future, including Figueroa in the deal. But I think taking an important bat out of Houston's lineup when they are one of the few teams that, if we really fall off and if they really were to come on over these last 2.5 months of the season, could be potentially keeping us out of the playoffs. So I think weakening them also makes sense. So we are going to go ahead and complete the trade. Brian Ramos is on board. Doesn't look like we got any boost in fan interest, which I was hoping we might, given that he is popular, but he's not very popular. So unfortunately, it's not going to help us with some of the financial aspects of the game, as we still sit there with a 56 fan interest. But the economics of this deal, with us getting Vesia and Arakawa off of the major league books, the Astros retaining the majority of Ramos' contract, does still have us in a position where we've got about $4 million in money at this point, because we also did get some money back in the trade that we made for Drake Baldwin. So we still can be a player for another trade or two over this next week and a half if we want, with the money that we have available. So I think that was a low-risk proposition for us, and I will, however, add our former big-time prospect, Mr. Figueroa, to the scouting department shortlist. So we'll make sure to check in on him over the years and see whether we regret this trade more in the future than we do today. And with the trade of Alex Vesia to bring Ramos on board, we brought up the left-handed reliever Vince Shaver. He pitched only 4 games for us in AAA this year. He's fragile physically, coming back from an injury that cost him all of 2032. Soon to be 27 years old. 15th round pick out of Lamar in 2028 will be making his major league debut. Stuff a little bit above average, average movement and control. Stuff a little tougher on lefties than it is on righties. I think he certainly can perform as well as the 7.71 ERA we got from Vesia, and think that he'll do it at a lower price and will give us another opportunity to see a youngish pitcher who's come up through our farm system. We ended up sending Stubblefield down to AAA. We were going to put Ramos in the lineup against right-handed pitching, as I noted. And Ramos actually allows us to break up a long string of lefties by putting him into the 5 spot in the order and adjusting some other things in the batting order. So that eliminates a little bit of the ability for someone to bring a lefty in as a reliever. And honestly, Manzardo, Keith, and Cabral are all pretty much the same type of hitters against lefties as they are against righties, so it wasn't a critical issue. But Ramos gives us a little bit more balance in that lineup, although admittedly there's still only one righty since we took Stubblefield out of the lineup. And we've moved Boakai out of the starting lineup and replaced him with the left-hander Baldwin. But we do still have 3 switch hitters in the lineup also. Given that Stubblefield was only going to be playing against left-handed pitching, though, at 24 years old, we figured it made more sense to just send him down to AAA to ensure that he was playing every day, because obviously Ramos is going to be in the center of our batting lineup, hitting cleanup against left-handed pitching, in addition to also being in the lineup against righties. So we could have certainly jury-rigged things to get Stubblefield in the lineup. Luis Taveras is a guy who's struggling that we certainly could have sent down, or we could have sent down Cody Morton instead. But given that Stubblefield is probably the biggest part of our future of those 3 guys, and he still has a little bit of untapped potential, we think, felt it made sense to get him some action in AAA and hopefully get his confidence back a little bit after he hasn't been hitting much this year. So we're going to keep an eye on the trade market over the next week and a half, and also see how the team does when we get back from the All-Star break. With the addition of the catcher Baldwin and the corner infielder, Mr. Ramos, feel like we've improved the team a bit. Certainly, bats like Sal Stewart and Spencer Torkelson could help us, and I'm still going to keep an eye on Marcelo Meyer, although, as we noted, the price for him is really high in terms of what we'll have to pay to pick him up. And despite Maui Ahuna's offensive limitations, if we believe that WAR is a somewhat valuable stat, Ahuna's actually been more valuable than Meyer this year. So I don't think it's critical that we bring Meyer on board. Even though our pitching has been good this year, borderline great, we'll keep an eye on the pitching market as well. Probably the most interesting option out there to me to consider would be a reunion with Kevin Kelly, who was with us in part of the 2032 season, did a nice job for us, although he's really struggling this year in Atlanta, and he's making an absolutely insane $24 million, so probably not that realistic. So barring something really unexpected happening, we'll check in after 3 games at Texas coming out of the All-Star break. And then we've got a couple games at the Dodgers and then 3 at home against Houston before we'll finally get to the trade deadline. So really just 8 games left until the trade deadline, even though it's only July 18th today. So probably not too much is going to change in terms of where we are in the standings and how we're feeling about this team. But you never know. A 7-0 record over the next 7 games versus an 0-7 record over the next 7 games could certainly have us thinking differently about what, if anything, we want to do before the opportunity to make trades is done here in 2033. And we've gotten a couple more of our key draftees from a week and a half ago signed. First round draft pick Eric Wilcox now signed, and the college reliever Doug Weiss also signed. Second round pick, another pitcher, Chris O'Donnell, wasn't happy that we made him a somewhat lower offer initially, so we're going to meet his demand now. Had a pretty impressive result for Oakland in the home run challenge in the finals. The teammates matched up, and Bobby Cabral topped Colt Keith in the home run challenge 24-16. So although Cabral was not an all-star this year, he is second or tied for second in the American League with 28 home runs at this point, and he just won the home run derby here in 2033 over his teammate. And we came out of the All-Star break with 3 straight one-run games, beat the Rangers 1-0, but then lost back-to-back extra inning games, 5-4 and 12-11 on the road. Get a day off to travel out to Los Angeles, and we're now heading into that final week before we reach the trade deadline. 10 back behind the Rangers in the division after losing 2 of 3 in the series. Baltimore has snuck by us for the first wild card spot, and it looks very conceivable as we sit here on July 25th that the Orioles and our A's will be facing off in a wild card series. Still 3.5 up on the White Sox and 7.5 up on the Astros for avoiding missing the playoffs entirely. So our poor play on the field is certainly making things interesting. We had won 5 in a row before the All-Star break to get back to 500 for the month, but we've since lost 4 in a row after winning the first game out of the break to extend the winning streak to 6 games. So unless we sweep against Houston here in this final series of the month, we're going to end up with a losing record this month. Even a sweep against Houston just gets us to 500. We're still second in the league in runs allowed, and as you can see, pretty good in just about every pitching category. And we have still ranked at 6th in runs allowed. So I don't know that we need to do anything else. We're 3 games below Pythagorean expectations. Certainly would like to be feeling better about the way that we're playing as we get close to the All-Star break, because that certainly does cause a little bit of nervousness in terms of, are we as good as we think we are? But I still think that the 2 moves we've made are probably all we really need to focus on. But we'll keep an open mind. And as we get ready for the final series of the month against Houston, just checking on a few other options. Potential for a reunion with our old buddy Shane Boz, who had some success with us a few years ago. He is in the final year of a 2-year deal with the Pirates now, after he was traded there from the Rangers last year before the trade deadline. Still think he could definitely help us. We don't really need him, but you look at the price, and if they're going to keep a decent chunk of his contract to make it palatable for us, we have to give up a pretty important player. The one I guess we could argue you maybe would be willing to include would be the utility infielder Andy Toribio, but he's been an above-average player in AAA for us this year, pretty versatile defensively, and a guy who I think could be a better offensive player than Arakawa was. So certainly having a guy like Toribio in the system made me much more willing to move on from Arakawa, but I don't know that I'm willing to also trade Toribio for a rental of Shane Boz for a couple of months when pitching is still pretty much our strength. And I also checked in on a few of the position players that we've been talking about, but the prices for Sal Stewart, Spencer Torkelson, who's still banged up, and Marcelo Meyer are pretty high, big-time players off of our major league roster, and or the top prospects in our system to possibly get a deal done, or even to just get the conversation about a deal going. So I'm inclined, I think, at this point to hold tight with what we have. If we lose the first 2 games against Houston, who knows, maybe I'll become a little more desperate. But right now, I think it's likely we've done what we're going to do before this trade deadline. And we split the first 2 games against Houston, routed them in game number 1, and then another extra inning loss for us, the third in just over a week in the Saturday game against the Astros. 1 left today against Houston on Sunday night, and we will be at the trade deadline. We did just get a pop-up that I clicked through, but John Fisher said that he switched his preference from win now. I think it was to balanced, maybe. I don't really remember his priority being win now, but it was a pop-up that he's changed something about how he is thinking about the season, and he's not as focused on winning now. Still wants us to reach the playoffs this year and upgrade at second base and improve our stats and steals. We're on a pretty good pace to reach all of those goals at this point as we sit here with 1 game left before the All-Star break, 11 out in the division, but 3 up on the White Sox for that final wild card spot, and would certainly love to beat the Astros here to take this series, even though it's not going to salvage a winning month for us. It'll push us another game ahead of the team that is most likely to crash the wild card party, which right now is the Orioles, the A's, and the White Sox. And we did win the final game of the series against Houston. So as we sit here on August 1st, past the trade deadline, our 60-47 record is 3 worse than expectations. We did just have our first losing month of the season for the month of July, but we rank 6th in the league in runs scored, second in the league in runs allowed. When we think about these Oakland A's, we're ninth out of 30 teams in the power rankings. We're 4 games up on the final wild card spot, 7.5 up on the Astros for missing the playoffs entirely. So still positioned pretty well, all things considered. Of course, Mason Miller just suffered an injury now that we're past the trade deadline. Maybe that would have made us make a different decision, but the date of the injury was yesterday, and we just found out about it after we had been in a position where we couldn't do anything else in the trade deadline. Doesn't seem like it's going to be anything that's going to disrupt him for the playoffs, so we'll get another opportunity to see some younger pitchers on the team, maybe even give our recently signed to an extension closer Levi Sterling the opportunity that we talked about he might be in line for in future seasons in the starting rotation. So kind of funny that those injuries always happen right when you can't do anything about them, but it is what it is, and as good as Mason has been for us over the course of this playthrough, I don't think losing him for a month is going to ultimately be the difference in whether we make the playoffs or not. You can see Drake Baldwin, the addition at catcher, off to a really nice start with us, hit 2 homers yesterday, and after having just a 1 home run in 71 at-bats in Cleveland, he's got 3 home runs in his first 26 at-bats in Oakland, so certainly getting much more offense out of that position than we had been when the youngster Boakai had been our starting catcher for most of the year. And with Miller going on to the IL, we are going to move Levi Sterling from the closer role into the number 5 role in the rotation. Certainly has the stamina in the arsenal to be a Mason Miller type pitcher. A little worried or they might give up some home runs, but best way to find out what we've got with him is to give him an opportunity. He started this year as a setup man, moved into the closer role when we lost Mr. Nardi for the season, and he's done a solid job for us there. And given that it still is conceivable that we're going to be down Ferris and or Burns from the rotation next year, getting an early preview at what Levi Sterling can do in the starting rotation may be helpful. Move the young reliever Jeremy Scholl into the closer role for the time being, give him an opportunity also. And then we brought up Shaver, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we made the trade. Now have brought up Sam Bailey, another guy to make his major league debut. He was a 4th-round pick of ours 3 years ago out of UNLV. Spent the last season plus in AAA for us, 8-4 this year with a sub-3 ERA. Looks like he could be a useful major league pitcher. Don't think he's going to be a star. Doesn't throw incredibly hard, but certainly has the stamina and a versatile arsenal where he could be either a starter or a reliever for us. And he's going to get his first opportunity in the majors as a long reliever over the next month or so. And with the addition of Bailey and Shaver recently, you can see we've got 5 left-handed arms out of the 8 in our bullpen. Definitely a larger number than you'd expect to see from most teams. But given that we've only got 1 lefty, Jackson Ferris, in the rotation, I think it actually works out pretty well for us because the 4 out of 5 games, we have a right-handed starter on the mound when that pitcher's coming out of the game in the 5th, 6th, hopefully 7th inning. Odds are we'll be putting a lefty in at that point, and then maybe the team will have to make some swaps, pinch hit, use some players up, and that could put us in a situation where in the real late innings of the game, hopefully we are better equipped with the right-handers, Jeremy Scholl or Caden Dana, in the late innings to potentially have the team in a situation where they've made most of the moves that they can make, and they're just kind of stuck with a right-handed hitter at that point, perhaps going up against one of our right-handed relievers in a big spot. So clearly don't know how well the AI will actually execute on this, but it can't hurt to give them options. And with the promotion of Mr. Bailey off of our AAA starting rotation to the majors, we're going to make another couple moves in the minors as well. Jaheim Pennyman, second overall pick in 2028 for us, has been respectable this year in Double-A, 10-4 record, but a 4.68 ERA. Struck out 131 batters in 109 and 2/3 innings, which is excellent. The issue is he's walked 63 and given up 15 home runs, and the walks in particular look like they may end up being the limiting factor on his career. But at 23 and a half years old, I think it's time to see what Mr. Pennyman can do at a higher level, so we're promoting him to AAA. And with that move, we're also going to promoting another former first-round draft pick as a pitcher, Amari Raphael, who we picked 22nd overall last year. We're promoting him up to the Double-A Midland Rockhounds to take Pennyman's spot in the rotation there. Raphael has actually not been great this year in high A ball. The 8-5 record is fine. The 140 strikeouts in 110 and 2/3 innings is more than fine. But the 25 home runs allowed and the 5.94 ERA are certainly not that impressive. But he has been pitching better of late. He got off to a very rough start over the first 3 months of the season, but in the month of July, he was 2-0 with a 3.48 ERA in Double-A in high A for us. And when we look at his ratings, he should be pretty solid in the Midwest League at this point when we look at those ratings. A little bit more challenging for him, potentially be moving up to Double-A ball, but given that he's 22 years old, and a player who was out of college, we're going to give him an opportunity over this next month and a half until the AAA season is over to get a little bit more seasoning at a higher level. Question whether he'll be able to start next year at AAA. It's probably not inconceivable that he'll be starting next year at Double-A. But want to continue to challenge a couple of these top pitching prospects of ours in Pennyman and Raphael and ensure that we're doing everything possible to test them and hopefully get them as equipped to contribute in the major leagues as possible. And before we finish things up, we'll check in on one final thing. We know that Baldwin's off to a nice start with us. Unfortunately, not the same can be said for Brian Ramos. Just 2 for his first 29 in Oakland. Does have a home run among those 2 hits. Presumably the .069 batting average he's put up in his first 8 games back in an Oakland uniform will be improving rather quickly over the coming weeks. Certainly would not expect a batter with his pedigree and his profile to continue to put up an .053 BABIP. So it seems like Ramos has just gotten very unlucky in the very small sample size in his return to Oakland. So we're feeling pretty good about this team as the month of August begins, and in our next episode, probably not going to be a ton of action other than following what this team does because we are past the trade deadline. Certainly we'll have some interesting decisions to make when we get to September call-ups. Likely we'll be seeing Mr. Stubblefield again. Hopefully Miller will be healthy again by the time we get to September, and there probably will be a couple other additions as well, which hopefully will ensure that the push for the playoffs this year for Oakland goes successfully. And when all is said and done, we are back in the postseason for a 4th time in 5 years, and we will find out the answer to those questions and many others in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.